All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for this next panel, New Models for Ultra-Rare Indications. It's really tough to follow Jimmy, very inspirational story. But what I wanted to do here at this meeting so far, we've had a lot of discussion about the unmet need around rare diseases and ultra-rare disorders. And there's been a call for new models, but very little specific. So what we want to do here at this particular panel is really start the conversation with a diverse set of stakeholders that have been engaged and involved in this opportunity, in this issue, and start the conversation around what the needs are and where the ecosystem here can help. Before I do that, I just want to frame the conversation just so that we're all level set on what we're talking about here. In terms of rare disorders, this is a slide that's been put together by Galen Atlantica in collaboration with ARM. And I really like this slide because it shows you the breadth and depth of rare disorders relative to other large indications. So on the x-axis, you have the number of diseases. Collectively, monogenic Mendelian disorders represent thousands of disorders that are actionable and continue to grow on a regular basis. Over 200 of these disorders are identified per year, and they affect a large portion of the population. On the y-axis, it's the prevalence. So I think this slide really nicely articulates the central challenge and opportunity here, where you have a wide diversity of disorders. Prevalence is lower than things like flu virus and autoimmune disorders, but the actionability and the potential for intervening with regenerative medicines and genetic medicines is pretty significant. Now, if we take a deeper look in terms of by the numbers, we often talk about rare disorders and we group them all together, but actually it's a bit more nuanced, this discussion. If you look at rare disorders just in terms of prevalence, on the far left, you have incidence of what we would call standard rare disorders, and there's various numbers, and we'll get into it into the panel. Are there actual classifications here, and what do these classifications mean practically and from an execution perspective? But as you go to the right hand of the curve, you get an increase in the number of disorders, but a decrease in the number of patients that are impacted by it. And I think this augments, if you look at the challenge with rare disorders, which are presumably nominally the easiest to intervene on, with rare disorders, the mean time to diagnosis is about 6 years, about 2.3 years longer to develop a drug product, and in terms of cost, it's infeasible. This problem and this risk magnifies significantly as you go to the right hand of the curve. And so for today's discussion with this panel, we really want to focus on the left hand of this curve, rare and ultra-rare. N of 1 is a completely different discussion, and I think it also begs a deeper dive among the community. But having said that, I'm very honored to be joined here by my panel, and I'll actually come over there and join you for a seat. But as we do this, I want each of the panelists to first introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your organization and where you fit into this entire ecosystem of rare and ultra-rare indications. So we'll start off here with Debbie.
Thanks, everyone, and good morning, and thanks for having me. I'm Debbie Drane. Until a couple of weeks ago, I headed up global commercial development for CSL Behring. I've moved over to the strategy team now, but spent a long time in commercial development and helped lead the launch preparation for Hemgenix, which is the first gene therapy for hemophilia B. CSL Behring, or CSL, is the parent company, has been in rare diseases actually for a very long time, been in hemophilia for over 40 years. So we were really excited to launch Hemgenix. And I'll touch a bit later as we talk more in this session about some of the challenges, particularly, so I'm going to focus more on the commercial side, which is the space that I know. But great to be here.
Thank you, Debbie.
I'm Craig Martin, founder and CEO of the Orphan Therapeutics Accelerator. The Accelerator is an organization focused on taking therapeutic programs for ultra-rare conditions that have advanced to phase 1, 2, have good safety data, have strong signals of efficacy, but aren't moving forward predominantly for commercial reasons. How did I get there? I started my career doing consulting primarily with emerging companies that were introducing new modalities and technologies. And, oftentimes, until recently, the first stop for those technologies was indications in rare. And through that work, got to know patient communities who oftentimes are the drug developers in the early stages, and their unique role in the process of advancing therapies, and a number of the companies that are involved in rare disease as well. In late 2020, took a bit of a detour. I was on the board of an organization called Global Genes and was asked to step in as interim CEO. Global Genes is a nonprofit that has about 800 rare disease groups as members, about 100 companies. And I was in that interim role for 2+ years, but it was during that period of time we started to see this precipitous decline and pullback in investment in rare and particularly ultra-rare diseases. And so in 2023, when I stepped out of that role, I was haunted by this notion that there are these therapies out there and the science is good. What's missing is the business model. And so our approach is really to leverage a nonprofit biotech status to obtain these treatment programs at low or no cost, to work with CDMO and CRO partners who often have excess capacity and may be willing to take on risk-based agreements, reward those partners at the back end when we have a PRB or commercial success that can generate value, and take a portion of that value as well and bring it back to the accelerator to do the next portfolio of treatments.
Great, thank you, Craig. We'll go across the country to Adora. Adora is dialing in. Adora, if you could introduce yourself and tell us a bit about where BridgeBio plays in the ecosystem.
Sure. Thank you for having me. More than do as officer for.
That's not good.
Yeah.
I hear a bit of an.
Yeah, I think. Maybe, Adora, we'll come back to you. Maybe if we could figure out the audio visual, it is a bit choppy here. Let's go with Fred, maybe, as we figure that out.
Yeah, so good morning. I'm Fred Chereau. I'm the head of strategy and business development at Alexion. And before that, I've done other things. And actually, also today, I think, almost day to day, it has been 25 years. I've been focusing a big part of my life on rare diseases. I started my career at Genzyme, where I stayed there for about a decade in multiple roles. And then I've been an entrepreneur for almost the rest of my career in mainly startup companies focusing on regenerative medicines. And actually, I tend to say sometimes that the first time I've been connected with gene therapy was at the previous century, because it was in 1999 when Genzyme was very involved in that, and that's always a technology I've been following, such as cell therapy. And I don't think I need to tell you about Alexion, AstraZeneca rare disease.
Great, thanks, Fred. And it's a special day for Fred today. It's his birthday. I think he said
happy birthday.
It's your 30th. Yeah, all right.
Well, that's the reason why I remember. It was 25 years ago I started.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Because I'm 25 years old, obviously.
Yeah, I know, yeah, I was going to say, big birthday. All right, Adora, let's get back to you. Adora, please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about BridgeBio.
All right, let's give this a shot. Do you hear an echo? I think that sounds clear. So Adora Ndu, I'm the Chief Regulatory Affairs Officer for BridgeBio Pharma. My background is in pharmacy and law. I've spent time at large companies, mid-size and small, as well as the Food and Drug Administration. I'm currently, as I mentioned, Chief Regulatory Officer for BridgeBio, which is a company, Bay Area-based biotech company founded in 2015. And our areas of focus really vary as far as size, but the common thread across the board is we focus on genetic diseases that have clear genetic drivers. And so with that, our first 2 approvals were actually in the ultra-rare space. The first in 2021, just 6 years after we were founded, we received our first approval for MOCD type A, which is an ultra-rare disease that impacted, at the time, about 100 known kids. These kids didn't live past the age of 4. debilitating seizures, brain injury, et cetera. And we did a lot of work with the agency to think through a flexible approach for development, and that our second for an FGFR2 fusion-driven cholangiocarcinoma, which impacted about 15 to 20% of the 20,000 known people with in the U.S. with cholangiocarcinoma. So for both of those first approvals, definitely quite a bit of experience as far as the regulatory path is concerned, and the type of work that is needed to get some of these treatments over to patients and accessible. So, but really happy to be here, and I think this is a very timely topic, just as we look at the rare, ultra-rare, nano-rare space and really think through how do we ensure that the needs of patients are served by the amazing technologies that companies and researchers are developing, and ensuring that they can actually reach the hands of patients.
Great, thanks, Adora. So as you can see, a really diverse set of expertise and stakeholders here, from nonprofit biotech to large pharma. So maybe I'll ask this first question to Adora and to you, Debbie. You know, at the beginning, I showed this slide that attempted to classify rare disorders into rare, ultra-rare, and N of 1. Just from a regulatory and maybe a commercial perspective, are these definitions accurate? And you know, how meaningful are they in terms of both of a regulatory perspective and commercial perspective, these types of criteria and classifications? Maybe we could start off with you, Debbie, and then we'll go to Adora.
Yeah, look, sure. I think that from our perspective, it's not so much about the classifications. It's that as you go from the left-hand side of that graph to the right, the challenges are there for everyone across the spectrum. They just get more difficult. From a commercial perspective, obviously, the lower the patient numbers, the more difficult it is to get, you know, therapies out to them, the more difficult, you know, it is to get them diagnosed and through the whole program, the longer the clinical trials take, all that kind of thing. But from a purely commercial perspective, unless you have a big company behind you, like a Pfizer or a Novartis, or even maybe CSL. So like, we're in hemophilia, so we're prepared to do rare, ultra-rare, ultra-rare, actually, because we've got a business that can sustain that. A single product on your own trying to do it, I just don't know how it's possible, because the machinery you need to launch these things is immense. Rita and I were talking yesterday about some similar experiences, you know, we've had, you know, between Bluebird and the CSL. You know, we probably have 500 people working to launch Hemgenix. 500 people. And it's hard. So I worry a little bit about putting categories, because they're all very, very, very hard. It just gets harder. And there's a point at which they're just simply not commercially viable, but we've got to find a way and a model to deal with that, because they are so beneficial to patients. So, you know, along your continuum, there's probably different types of commercial models that we have to develop because of the different challenges. So, but categories, I'm not sure help. What helps is solutions.
Yeah, great. Adora, how about from the regulatory perspective? I mean,
yeah, I would agree. There's quite a bit of similarities when you think about the regulatory space. And to your question specifically, there is only one definition, which is rare, right? Less than 200,000. And so, but as far as how you approach drug development and the regulatory path, there is clearly a spectrum when you go from the left to the right of the slide that you shared. And the level of difficulty continues to increase as you move further to the right, and you have less and less patients to include. And again, we have to remember that, you know, we're running global trials. And, you know, as in the first development program that I highlighted, where at the time there were 100 known patients, there's just no practical way to run the clinical development program that would meet the regulatory gold standard for approval. And so, you know, it certainly presents with many nuanced challenges. Now, as far as whether there is a need to specifically define a number, I don't know that a number specifically is needed, because as soon as you identify a number, you're going to identify the bounds outside of that specific number. if you say it's 5,000, what happens if your numbers are 5,001 or 5,010? And once you have a regulatory definition, then the regulators need to operate within that framework. So I think it's a slippery slope. That said, I would say that from the regulatory perspective, there is a need to understand that the smaller you get, the more flexibility will be needed when you start thinking about, patient numbers, the control, the type of control that's needed, duration of trial, et cetera. All of those elements will need to really think a little bit differently and help the reviewers, that collaboration with the agency reviewers, researchers and developers to really kind of align on what path is pragmatic for some of these ultra rare diseases.
Thanks, Adora. So I think you beautifully, both you and Debbie, articulated the challenges from the commercial and regulatory side, and why sometimes these are, you need to have a critical mass and some flexibility. But maybe we could start from the beginning of the patient journey with diagnosis. It seems like that's a huge challenge. On average, takes longer to diagnose a patient. Maybe Craig, you could share with us some insights from your experience. What are the challenges in early diagnosis, and what types of potential solutions have you seen or new models to accelerate and overcome some of those challenges?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think when you think about rare disease more broadly, more than half of rare disease patients are children. So in the U.S., that's 15 million plus. A third of those children die by age 5. And the average diagnostic odyssey in rare disease is 5 to 7 years. So literally longer than a lifetime for many of these kids. And I think the path forward has to include greater access to whole genome sequencing and even in the nearer term, whole exome sequencing-based panels and tests, because without that access, we saw how many rare diseases are genetic in basis. It's hard to find those patients. The other issue is lack of expertise. There aren't that many medical geneticists out there to help look at and interpret the tests and help patients get to a diagnosis. But once there is a diagnosis, the challenge continues, right? Because getting access to a clinical trial and recruiting sufficient patients to be in that trial is critical. But at the end of the day, if there's no business model for that product to get to patients, then we've gone through all this for nothing. And that patient doesn't have a lot of time. So I think we've seen a lot of efforts around newborn screening, creating more access to that, creating networks of partners that can collaborate together to share data and expertise. We've got the Undiagnosed Disease Network with NIH that's doing some of that work too. So there are efforts out there. I think payers sometimes want to push back because they say, well, what good is it if we get you a diagnosis if there isn't a treatment, which is ridiculous because, there could be a trial or we could learn more about a condition area that we otherwise wouldn't. So there are some efforts. We've got a long way to go. As the cost of this kind of testing comes down, that will hopefully expand access as well. But that's just the start.
No, I know there's been efforts by national health systems like the UK, some of the Scandinavian countries to do more broad sequencing of newborns. Has that led in any significant impact or changes since these policies have been implemented, or?
Well, I've seen some data on some of the programs that indicate, certainly a higher percentage of diagnosis. They're smart in that they're also trying to tie it into reduced cost in the system. But we need a lot more of those programs to reach the number of people that need to be tested and need to get a diagnosis.
So, Craig, you've nicely articulated the challenge with diagnostic. The next step in the journey is once you've diagnosed it, you have to actually develop a therapeutic, and step one is to really do the preclinical research and discovery. So Fred, I'll turn to you. I mean, it seems like the challenge here is going to be the lack of preclinical models, animal models. So from your drug development perspective, how do you approach rare and ultra-rare disorders, and what are some alternative models that could accelerate that journey from the preclinical discovery to identifying the lead candidate?
So first, I would like to say that I agree with what Adora and David said about not dichotomizing the rare disease space too much and paying attention to that, because I think obviously some cases are very extreme and maybe they need to be treated slightly differently, but it's by itself a small, I mean, too big, but a small population, and I think by being more unified within this population, we can do better things for the patients. I mean, back to your question, and when we look at a project, a disease, we try to apply three main criteria to start with. The first one being the unmet need, and you could claim that the unmet need has a relationship with the number of patients within the rare disease space, but we really look at the severity of the disease, and then the next criteria is we like to say we follow the science. And we see how this science can lead us to a solution for this specific disease, and how differentiated, if needed, it is compared to other approaches which has been taken and has not worked sometimes, or some other things which are delivering a fully satisfying product to the patient. And the third one is, because we are a large company with a number of rare disease drugs for multiple diseases, we always look at the synergies with the rest of our portfolio, and mainly for two reasons. Because when you know a space well, I think you can progress within the space faster. And answering your question about the preclinical model, for instance, it's sometimes we don't have the preclinical model, but we've been thinking about some existing preclinical models in this therapeutic area, and also for us, it's the synergies we can create around patient association, around physicians, key opinion leaders, around treatment centers. Are very powerful in terms of progress. The speed at which we can develop the program, and back to the topic of the day today, it's I think the smaller the disease is, the closer we should try to be in terms of other diseases for which we have found a solution already.
So that's helpful. So once you've defined then the target and you have maybe a lead candidate, I think the next challenge is really around the incentives and the funding for actually pushing it forward. And Debbie, you mentioned CSL has a critical mass, maybe a commercial infrastructure, which can be leveraged for a certain class of diseases, let's say. But for the right-hand side of that curve, I think it becomes a bit more challenging. So. Debbie, what types of funding models have you seen as alternatives to the traditional model that have some promise and hope in terms of incentivizing people to develop for that right-hand side of the curve?
Yeah, look, and it is pleasing, I think, to see that people are trying. People are trying. Some of the countries around the world that are kind of leading in this space are somewhat surprising. The UK, we just recently got Hemgenix approved for reimbursement in the UK under this new fund called the Innovative Medicines Fund, which is set up specifically for these very innovative, high-cost single dose. So set up almost for gene therapy. It's not just gene therapy, it will deal with other things, similar to the cancer fund that they have. So different approach to evaluating, different approach to valuing, because we've been talking for many years, we've got to get the conversation away from cost to value. And as you go down that spectrum, and even within, some of the areas within the spectrum, value is different. It's different depending on the severity of the disease, what else is available, all sorts of things. But at least if you can have that conversation, you're starting to get a better alignment. And so UK and France have some interesting programs. But they also, so that's a commercial model. You still need a certain number of patients available to go down that kind of pathway. And there's no number per se, but a certain value, let's say. So that's good for the pure commercialization. But we're all doing it one-off. So CSL are going, Bluebird are going, Novartis are going, Pfizer is going. And, I think this is an area, and we're not allowed to work together. Okay, that's, if we're competing in the same space. But the challenges that we're facing aren't about our drugs. If that is all it was, then you just get out and you hammer it out in the market. But this isn't about that. This is about that access issue. And once access is given, then you hammer it out in the market, and the best product, kind of wins. But if there was a way that we could, get together to face this challenge, I think we could be stronger. And, organisations like ARM can certainly help that. But then for the very right-hand side as you go, that's still not a viable business model. So then you need things, I think, like public partnerships, and it's really the only way to go. And the only truly successful one that I'm aware of is the Telethon Foundation in Milan, and they've been really successful in Italy.
Yeah.
And people do fly into Italy, but it's not necessarily a scalable model. But it shows that if you can bring the right people together, they get government funding, they get philanthropic funding, they do fundraising, like they're getting funding from all sorts of places and directing it to, those diseases that otherwise would not be commercialised. But they worked. Yeah. One was even registered and still not able to be commercialised. Right. So they picked that up, as well. So if we could find a way to maybe scale that model a little bit, at least to get it in more countries. But I also think that we haven't really perhaps got the right people here, but making these things much cheaper is also a key to success, because even with, a $3.5 million price tag, we're not making a lot of money.
No, that's, Fred, you have some...
I'd like to, I'm going to take two risks here. I'm going to look like a dinosaur, maybe, and it's my birthday today, as you said, but, and secondly, maybe be a little bit controversial. I think we should not forget that 40 plus years ago, a group of scientists and executives have been able to define the world of rare disease. Before that, nobody was paying attention. Yep. And how did they do that? Is by being very disruptive to what the global model was at the time. That was my part, historian or dinosaur. Where I'd like to, where I think we should pay attention as an industry is to be more disruptive, We have a tendency, and even in gene therapy and cell therapy, we have a tendency to apply old recipes which have been working in rare disease. And Debbie was talking about a model which will allow us to reimburse these drugs, which are more expensive to develop than it was in the past. And I'm not sure we have been extremely disruptive and working together using all this brain power which is existing. And by the way, organizations like ARM, which were not existing at the time when the Orphan Drug Act has been written, and I think it's important for patients if we can rally all these energies, maybe on a limited number of diseases to start with, because it's also a problem in this industry. I mean, there are 10,000, you pick the number you want, it's always evolving. 10,000 diseases, when you look at the number of drugs which are currently in development, many of them are developed for the same diseases. And it's also, I think industry should have the conscience of that. And obviously, people go where it might be a little bit easier, where you have biomarkers, where you have preclinical models, when there is a path somewhere where there is a slightly larger patient population because the economical model is not viable yet. But I think if we continue to follow each other that way and continue to use the old recipes, it's not going to help this industry.
So continuing in that vein of, maybe we need new recipes, I think, it's interesting. Rita mentioned yesterday that in terms of attendees, the number one country is the US, but then we have the UK, Canada, and a few other countries. And I note that in the success models that you mentioned, Craig, and that you, Debbie, it seems that they're mostly in countries with nationalized healthcare systems that almost have a critical mass for diagnostics and therapeutics. I mean, is that part of the recipe that's required, maybe? Adora, I open it up to everyone. I mean, is this really a problem that can be leveraged by the industry, or is this really a problem that's too big for industry to actually be incentivized to get together and work together, and it really requires that, central convener?
I don't know. I mean, you don't want me to speak all the time, but Adora.
I guess, from a perspective of somebody that's been involved with industry, but also on the nonprofit side, I think in order for you to have success, this notion of public-private partnership has to be more collaborative. And what I mean by that is I think there's somewhat of an inherent tension in the US between the government, what it prioritizes and values, and industry and innovation, in that, when you have a government that is funding programs, but then talking about clawback rights or march-in rights, or that is, out there saying, well, we're supportive of innovation, but then they want to control prices, or they want to, do other things. That doesn't set the stage for a collaborative relationship, nor does it encourage others to invest in innovation. And so in the end, what ends up happening is there's a lot of lip service to how we're going to collaborate and no real action out of it. I mean, if you look at, for example, the amount of money that was invested in Operation Warp Speed, right? That could get 200 rare disease therapies developed and to patients. Why isn't there more collaboration on it? Well, because these rare diseases distinctly are not in the public eye, so there's not that focus or sense of urgency, and yet arguably rare diseases is the largest area of unmet medical need globally.
No, those are great points, and I think, that concept of public-private partnerships, I think we're seeing some traction there with things like BGTC, but, Adora, maybe you could comment a bit on this. Like, what's your perspective on, these public-private partnerships? What are they doing well, and what are some opportunities for, improvement in terms of scope to really address some of the challenges that Craig has outlined here?
What I would add to that is that I do think that there's a need for alignment on the goal between government agencies and the private sector that are really driving quite a bit of the innovation. And where that comes from is in the policies and the regulations and the statutes that are rolled out that impact how we operate and how we innovate. I would say since, ODA was rolled out, we've, obviously seen significant increase in investment and activity because of a lot of the incentives that have come from the Orphan Drug Act. But at the same time, we're not there yet, and so it's interesting to hear these conversations about whether, incentives need to be rolled back. Meanwhile, we have 95% of these rare diseases have zero treatments available. So I think there's just got to be a meeting of the minds on what are we trying to solve here? What's the real issue? And what are the challenges that are preventing us from getting more treatments to patients? There's got to be more government incentives and funding in the rare, especially in the ultra rare, nano rare space, because that continues to help drive innovation, especially for models that are taking more of the nonprofit type of approach, where there's going to be a need to rely on one, a clear framework and a path forward, but as also the incentivizing development in those areas. And then I would also say that one of the key challenges in this space, as we talked about the slide that you presented earlier, as you move towards the right of that scale, things get much more difficult as far as drug development and the regulatory pathway. And I would take a leap to say that the level of regulatory uncertainty increases because we are trying to fit these very small populations in a framework that was not developed for them. And so with each product, with each center, with each review division, you're sort of reinterpreting the application of statute and regulation. And I do think there is a huge opportunity to look to shrink that level of uncertainty. And part of that is sort of establishing clearer frameworks with regards to what could be acceptable in what scenario. Obviously, each case is different. It's never an apples to apples, but there are many learnings that could be transferred from one application and review to another to help so that we're building versus reinventing the approach every single time. And so establishing those frameworks so that we're all on the same page, we're all having the same starting point, I think becomes really important from a regulatory perspective.
No, thank you, Adora. So we only have a few minutes left. I want to wrap up on a positive note in terms of, I want to ask each of the panelists what most excites you on the horizon over the next 5 to 10 years. What, model, be it commercial, diagnostics, regulatory, whatever, what keeps you optimistic about this space? And what do you see as, potential breakthroughs in the next 5 to 10 years? We'll start with Debbie.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, I'm really excited to see countries around the world try and take this issue on. I think we've got one big country that's not doing it as well, and I'm excited. Actually, yesterday we had a lunchtime discussion on this. I call our workshop 007 Reader, and you can find out why one day, but there's this really cool bunch of ideas about how we might be able to fund all gene therapies, not each company working out their own models. So I'm really excited by that because there's so many companies. I completely agree with Fred. We've got to be disruptive here. When monoclonal antibodies hit, I'm sure were facing the same types of challenges for reimbursement, but they found a way to do it. And so we have to absolutely be disruptive and leverage the knowledge and the brains of the many, many people that are working on this. I'm optimistic that we'll find a solution.
Great, thank you, Debbie. Craig?
Yeah, I'm excited about at least the signals of regulatory flexibility and platform approaches and things like that, which, many of the programs that we've looked at stalled because the cost of navigating through the regulatory requirements for that registration study were just too high. And so bringing that cost down along with this sort of, public-private, nonprofit types of collaborations, I think is poised to make a pretty significant difference. And so I'm excited to see that evolve.
Great, thanks, Craig. Adora?
I'm excited to see the future direction of CBER. I would say that PDUFA 7 was really the first time we saw such a large package and allocation for the Center for Biologics specifically. And so I think, from an external perspective, it's going to take time for those changes to really start to make an impact. And I do think that the center leadership is moving in a very positive direction. And, I'm excited about the collaboration between CBER and ARM, because I think that's going to make a meaningful change in bringing many of these treatments to patients. I'm also excited about the new models that are being explored, especially for the smaller populations. Craig, to your point about the work that you're doing in the nonprofit space, I think there's a huge opportunity there, especially as we see the shift in investment from the much smaller populations to, a little bit larger. So there's a lot on the horizon to be excited about, certainly.
And last but not least, Fred.
So I'm very convinced that if we can continue to develop good drug for patients and we show that they make a difference for these patients, their family, the caretaker, and so on, we will find the right framework, the right models, It might take time, but that would be the best way to convince payer, regulators, and all the ecosystem we need to continue to bring more drugs for potentially for patient population smaller and smaller. I'm also, what I wish for the future is that despite the fact that there's been most of my life an entrepreneur and I'm in a new life now, big companies have a power which can be important to continue to develop drug disease, rare disease drugs. And I'm amazed, like last week when I saw we at Alexion, we got Canuma, which is for a very, very tiny patient population in Montenegro, you know. So this expansion all over the world can be done only by companies who have this type of infrastructures, such as Alexion, AstraZeneca, and so on. And I think we still have a lot of work to do, and it's very exciting to continue to work on this in this space. And we are very lucky. We should never forget that we are very, very lucky to be able to give some sense to what we do every day.
Great. Thank you so much, Fred. Thank you to my fellow panelists. Now let's stand up and sing happy birthday to Fred. Great. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.